Welcome to the Intelligence Stack.
Hey, glad to be here.
So imagine your company spends, I don't know, $5 million a year on this massive suite of enterprise software.
Yeah, which is a pretty standard budget for a lot of big orgs out there.
Right, exactly. And you get these gorgeous dashboards, incredibly intuitive menus, color-coded graphs. But imagine that literally no one in your entire organization ever looks at those screens, not even once.
Nobody logs in. Nobody clicks a single button.
Exactly. But the actual work, the routing, the processing, the approvals, it's somehow getting done faster than ever before.
Which sounds like magic, but it's happening.
It is. So today, we are doing deep dive into exactly that scenario. Because SaaS, software as a service, is basically eating itself from the inside out.
It really is. And it captures this reality that, honestly, a lot of organizations are just entirely unprepared for right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we are moving away from an era where humans navigate visual interfaces, and we're entering this completely new era where autonomous AI agents just interact directly with the underlying data.
And our mission today is to figure out how this is turning enterprise software completely inside out. We're going to look at why the traditional user interface, the screen you actually click on, why that's becoming obsolete.
Yep.
And why this is causing this massive structural collapse in how software is priced, how it's governed, and how it's protected.
It's a huge shift.
To really visualize the core thesis here, think about it like this. For 20 years, buying SaaS was like going to a really fancy restaurant.
Okay, I like this.
You paid a premium for the beautiful ambiance, right? The curated menu, the attentive waiter. In this scenario, the waiter in the dining room, they represent the user interface. It's the thing you interact with.
Right, the presentation layer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now, AI agents are basically driving a delivery truck directly to the restaurant's loading the data layer.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They're taking the food straight from the kitchen without ever stepping foot in the dining room. So the question for you listening is, if your dining room is entirely empty, why are you still paying for the waiter?
That is, honestly, that's the perfect analogy to frame this whole thing. And, to put some actual numbers to that restaurant scenario, let's talk about the great inversion.
The great inversion, right.
Yeah. So historically, if you looked at where the actual value of a software product lived, like where the R&D money went, what customers actually felt they were paying for, about 70% of that value was wrapped up in the user interface.
70%.
It was all about making the software easy for human beings to use. About 10% was the underlying data model, and the rest was just the business logic, the rules. The interface was basically the vendor's protective moat.
Wait, I'm genuinely confused by that. How do we even measure that? I mean, are we talking about the size of the code base or like what the customer is actually willing to pay for? Because 70 to 10 is a massive claim.
It's a mix of both, really. It's perceived customer value and development prioritization. Think about the last software pitch you sat through.
Okay.
What did they show you?
They showed me the dashboard.
Exactly. They showed you the dashboard. They sold you on how incredibly intuitive it was for your employees to use. The data model, which is essentially the architectural blueprint of how information is organized, like how a customer links to an invoice in the back end, it was a total afterthought for the buyer.
Oh, I see. Yeah, nobody asks to look at the database schema during a sales pitch.
Right. But now, that ratio is completely flipping. The data model is rapidly becoming 60% of the product's value, and the UI is shrinking down to just 10%.
Wow. Okay, so from 70% down to 10% for the interface.
Exactly. So for anyone listening right now who manages an enterprise tech stack, I mean, this is not just a neat technology update.
Yeah.
This is a massive tectonic shift in where your money is actually going, because suddenly you're holding these contracts for beautifully designed interfaces that your automated agentic workflows just literally no longer need.
So let's look at what actually happens when you fire the waiter, so to speak. Back in late 2024, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella went on a show and just plainly stated, SaaS is dead.
Which is wild.
Yeah. Coming from the head of Microsoft, that's a massive statement to make. His whole argument was that SaaS is basically just a database wrapped in a nice interface. If an AI can replace the interface, what are you actually buying?
Right.
And we saw this play out in the real world with Klarna, which sent absolute shockwaves through the industry.
Oh, it absolutely did. Klarna's CEO, Sebastian Samikowski, he essentially just drew a line in the sand.
Yeah.
He announced they were done with Salesforce, done with Workday.
Just dropped them entirely?
Yeah. They replaced the equivalent of 700 customer service roles with an AI agent that they built using OpenAI's models.
And the initial number, I mean, they were staggering. Query resolution times dropped from 11 minutes down to just 2 minutes.
Crazy.
They projected $40 million in annual savings for an implementation cost of only like $2 to $3 million.
Right.
That is the kind of ROI that makes a CFO literally weep with joy. But okay, let's unpack this for a second. If Klarna saved $40 million and completely crushed their resolution times, why did they quietly start reversing course by early 2026?
Well, because reality is always way messier than the initial headline, right? And this is where the actual mechanism of how AI works becomes really crucial.
Right.
What Klarna discovered was that their customer satisfaction scores began to deteriorate sharply on complex edge case interactions.
Edge cases meaning what exactly?
Meaning highly nuanced, emotionally complex issues. I mean, AI language models are essentially incredibly sophisticated probability engines.
Sure.
They don't actually understand empathy. So if a customer misses a payment because of a sudden tragic medical emergency, a human agent senses the tone, applies human judgment, and pivots to, empathy and alternative solutions.
Yeah, they bend the rules a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The AI just routed the standard policy response because it mathematically matched the pattern of a missed payment. The AI was phenomenal at handling a high volume of structured, repeatable requests, password resets, basic refunds.
Right, the simple stuff.
Yeah, but it struggled deeply with actual judgment calls.
So they basically had to rebuild a hybrid model where the AI handles the routine stuff and the human agents step in and handle the escalations.
That's exactly it. So the core takeaway here isn't that AI agents don't work. It's that this transition is a redistribution of work, not a simple binary replacement.
Right.
The AI successfully replaced the software's interface for the customer, but it didn't replace the need for human judgment in complex scenarios. And more importantly, and this is really what Nadella was getting at, the underlying data still had to live somewhere.
Yes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the tech press called the Klarna situation a workforce story. They focused entirely on the 700 jobs, but it was actually a product and architecture story.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, the AI replaced the Salesforce interface, but it didn't replace the fundamental value of the database holding the actual customer records.
As you're describing this, my mind immediately goes to something a lot of our listeners have definitely lived through. We did this whole bots clicking screens thing, 5 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
I know what some of you listening might be thinking right now. You're thinking, this is just robotic process automation, or RPA, all over again.
Right.
But we need to draw a very hard line here.
Yeah.
How is this actually any different from the RPA bots we already deployed?
It is entirely different from a structural standpoint. I mean, RPA was essentially digital theater.
Digital theater, I love that.
It really was. It was a Band-Aid designed to bridge the gap between human-designed interfaces and automated processes by literally mimicking human behavior. An RPA bot would watch where a human clicked on a screen, recorded that exact X and Y coordinate on the monitor, and just play it back over and over.
It pretended to be a human.
Yes, so it could use software that was designed for humans.
And it was incredibly brittle. I mean, I remember talking to IT directors who were tearing their hair out because if a SaaS vendor updated their UI and just moved a submit button a quarter inch to the right or even just changed the color of the button from blue to green, the entire RPA bot would just completely break.
It was an absolute nightmare to maintain. Every single user interface change was a breaking change for the automation. The fundamental failure of RPA was treating the user interface as the integration layer.
Okay, so if RPA clicked the screen, what exactly are AI agents doing instead?
Agents bypass the user interface entirely. They do not care what a dashboard looks like because they never even look at it. An agent calls the API, the application programming interface, directly.
Okay, let's do a quick ELI 5 on that. Explain it. I'm Hub 5 for anyone who isn't super deep in backend architecture. What is the API in our restaurant analogy from earlier?
Okay, so if the UI is the beautifully printed, letter-bound menu designed for human eyes, the API is the raw digital ticket system used back in the kitchen.
Ah.
The kitchen doesn't need the pretty menu, it just needs the raw data. Table 4, steak, medium rare. Agents read that raw structured data. So if a vendor rolls out a massive UI upgrade that would normally break every single RPA bot in your whole organization, an AI agent never even notices.
Wow.
It just keeps reading the kitchen tickets.
So what does this all mean for your current tech stack? I mean, it means the speed of execution completely changes, right?
Completely. Think about the workflows managed by platforms like Zendesk or ServiceNow.
Okay.
A human has to log in, navigate a menu, open a ticket, read the text, synthesize a decision, and then click a sequence of buttons to close it.
Right.
That takes hours of human time across a massive queue. An agent compresses that entire sequence into a few milliseconds of API calls. It reads the raw data, applies a reasoning model, and pushes the decision back into the database instantly.
Which makes perfect sense technically, but if we follow that logic, it brings up a massive, massive business problem.
Oh, totally.
If agents bypass the interface entirely and they compress hours of human work into milliseconds, the fundamental business model of the entire SaaS industry for the last 20 years just completely collapses. I'm talking about charging per human seat.
Yep. The seat-based pricing model is structurally dying as we speak.
Yeah.
I mean, for 2 decades, vendors grew their revenue by getting you to hire more humans to use their software.
Right.
Now, the goal is to use fewer humans. The numbers show that seat-based pricing dropped from being the primary model for 21% of companies down to just 15% in a single 12-month window.
That's a huge drop in 1 year.
It is. Meanwhile, credit-based consumption pricing models, where you pay for the amount of computer actions you take, those grew by 126%.
And the ultimate example of this existential pricing confusion is what happened with Salesforce's Agentforce. It's wild to look at. In just 18 months, Salesforce rolled out 3 completely conflicting pricing models for the exact same product.
Yeah, they were panicking.
First, they said it was $2 per conversation. Then they pivoted to this super complex flex credit system where it was 10 cents per action. And then, almost out of nowhere, they introduced an enterprise license agreement at $125 per user per month.
Which is just literally reverting back to the old seat logic.
Right.
They're trying everything because they're caught in a trap.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If Salesforce's AI actually works perfectly, their customers need fewer human seats. Improving their own product literally destroys their own pricing engine.
Exactly.
If I buy their AI and fire 500 support reps, I don't need those 500 Salesforce licenses anymore. They've optimized themselves out of revenue.
That is the exact paradox they're facing right now. And the internal data backs this up. Salesforce ran hundreds of thousands of support interactions through Agentforce, and the vast majority resolved without a human.
Wow.
One of their own sales engineers actually noted a 10% reduction in seat count across 90 major enterprise accounts. Think about that from the vendor's perspective. Your absolute best product feature is actively shrinking your most reliable revenue stream.
So for you listening, if you're managing these budgets or preparing for Q3 negotiations, you really need to recognize that your SaaS vendors are quietly in a massive bind.
They really are.
They've built these AI capabilities, they know these tools will reduce the number of seats you need to buy, and they are desperately trying to figure out how to keep their revenue flat or growing while selling you fewer seats. Your next contract renewal is exactly where this underlying tension is going to explode.
Which is exactly why you're seeing this massive shift toward consumption models.
Right.
But it's also why you're seeing vendors become incredibly territorial.
Right, because if the UI is worthless and the value has moved entirely into the data layer, aren't the legacy vendors the ones who actually hold your company's data?
Mm-hmm.
Aren't they going to put up a fight to protect their territory?
Oh, they're going to build huge walls. And what happened with SAP in April 2026 is a huge warning sign for the entire industry. SAP updated its API policy with a very specific, very aggressive restriction. They essentially blocked third-party AI agents from touching SAP data outside of SAP-endorsed architectures.
Meaning, if I want an autonomous agent to plan a supply chain sequence or execute a purchase order inside my SAP system, I can't use my own tools.
Exactly. You are forced to use SAP's own AI agent, which is called Joule. So, tools like Microsoft Copilot or any independent agent your internal engineering team has built, those are suddenly violating the policy.
Unbelievable.
But the usage numbers here are what make this so contentious. Only 3% of SAP customers were actually using Joule in production. Meanwhile, 77% of AI-active SAP enterprises were relying on Microsoft Copilot.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this for just a second, because SAP isn't just being purely malicious here, right? I mean, if thousands of AI agents are pinging their database millions of times a second via the API, won't that literally crash the system?
Whoa, yes.
Isn't SAP technically right to lock this down for security and stability?
Yes, to be entirely fair, that is a perfectly valid security angle. SAP claimed this was a necessary measure, arguing that autonomous agents hammering enterprise APIs at scale can introduce genuine vulnerabilities and cause denial of service scenarios.
Right.
High-volume, unstructured API calls from rogue or poorly coded agents are a very real threat. But the implementation of that security measure is what critics are calling out. They're calling it AI vendor lock-in, dressed up as a security framework.
Ah, I see.
Because if security was the only concern, you could rate limit the API. You could charge for higher API throughput. Instead, they just mandated the use of their specific agent.
Which brings up a great question for you, the listener. How many of your current SaaS contracts explicitly restrict third-party AI agents from accessing your data? I'd bet most CIOs haven't even checked the fine print on these recent updates.
And they need to audit those contracts immediately, because the collateral damage of this lockdown is massive, particularly for small and medium businesses, the SMB sector. SAP tied access to Joule to their highly expensive Rise or Grow Cloud contracts. It completely excludes customers who are still running their software on-premise, on their own local servers.
And isn't there a massive deadline looming for those on-premise customers?
Yes. Support for SAP's older ECC 6.0 system ends in December 2027. So you have over 10,000 customers facing a forced migration. SAP is basically saying, you want AI capabilities, move to our expensive cloud environment and use our agent exclusively.
Wow.
For a massive Fortune 500 enterprise, this is just an expensive annoyance. But for an SMB running a leaner operation, independent AI agents running over their ERP data would give them incredible leverage they simply can't afford to buy with human headcount. By closing the API, SAP is slamming that door completely shut.
It feels like a fundamental misread of how software ecosystems thrive today.
Huh.
If we look at the companies that have grown the most over the last decade, they made it exceptionally easy to build on top of them, like Stripe, Twilio. They're incredibly API-friendly.
Which raises an important question, right? Is moat building a viable long-term strategy in an API-first world? By trying to lock down the data layer, SAP is choosing to compete against the entire AI ecosystem rather than trying to lead it as the foundational system of record. And given that 77% of their AI active base prefers Microsoft Copilot, trying to force adoption of Joule is a very, very risky bet against their own customers' preferences.
So let's say you're a brilliant tech leader listening to this. You navigate all of this. You manage the pricing changes, moving from seats to consumption. You fight through the vendor lock-in and the API restrictions to get your agents working. You still have a ticking time bomb sitting inside your own organization.
Yep.
And that time bomb is your data quality.
Oh, this is the silent failure of the agentic era. When a human uses enterprise software, they apply context and judgment constantly, often without even realizing it.
Give me an example of that.
So if a CRM system has a contact record with an email address from 4 years ago, and the company name is listed as, Blockbuster Video, a human sales rep looks at that, realizes it's completely outdated, and just ignores it. They go to LinkedIn, find the right email, and move on.
Right. The human acts as an automatic filter for garbage data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But an agent doesn't do that. An agent lacks judgment entirely unless it is specifically programmed to verify every single data point, which is incredibly computationally expensive.
Oh, true.
It simply applies the rules it was given, so it executes perfectly and confidently on absolute garbage data. It doesn't know that a cost center was dissolved in the last reorg or that a client changed companies. It just reads the API and fires off the action. It fails silently at scale.
It's like hiring a brilliant, hyper-efficient executive assistant, putting them in a dark, windowless room full of outdated filing cabinets and just saying, do whatever the files say. The assistant is working at lightning speed, executing thousands of tasks a minute, but they don't know the files are from 2019.
That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And this highlights a massive reskilling crisis that nobody is talking about loudly enough in the enterprise space. The entire SaaS ecosystem created hundreds of thousands of jobs that are now facing structural obsolescence. Think about UX designers who spent their entire careers mapping how humans click through visual dashboards.
Yeah.
Or UI QA engineers who test those user flows to make sure menus drop down correctly. Or implementation consultants whose entire job is to just train human staff on how to navigate new software interfaces.
Because if the humans aren't clicking and the interface is entirely bypassed by an agent, those roles just evaporate.
They are heavily compressed, yes. The skills an enterprise needs now to survive this shift are totally different. You need deep expertise in data modeling people who can structure the information so an agent can actually understand the relationships between different data points.
Okay.
You need agent interaction architecture people who can design how an agent evaluates an outcome, and more importantly, when it should stop and escalate to a human. And most critically, you need rigorous, uncompromising data governance.
Which brings us to a really harsh reality check. If your data governance team hasn't sat down in a room with your product team recently, your organization simply isn't ready for agent-native workflows. The AI technology might be there, the vendors might be pushing it, but your foundation isn't ready.
Right. Because agents will amplify your data quality problems. They will not tolerate them the way human users do. A human works around bad data. An agent weaponizes it.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. The whole narrative that SaaS is dead isn't quite right. SaaS isn't dying, it's just becoming invisible infrastructure. For 20 years, the user interface was the product, but that era is over.
Yep.
The data layer is the new product. Pure seat-based pricing is on its way to becoming a relic, and the vendors who survive will be the ones who figure out how to adapt to credit and consumption models without bleeding out their revenue. And internally, the future belongs entirely to organizations that have clean, deeply governed data and an API-first architecture.
Absolutely. The transition from humans clicking screens to agents calling APIs, it changes the fundamental physics of the enterprise. But it leaves us with an incredibly complex issue to resolve moving forward.
Was that?
Well, if an AI agent eventually becomes completely autonomous at executing your core business logic, and your software vendors are reduced to being just, dumb data pipes holding your raw records, who actually owns the intelligence of your company?
Oh, wow.
Right? Is it the AI platform providing the reasoning model? Is it the legacy vendor holding the historical data? Or is it you? It might be time to fundamentally rethink what intellectual property actually looks like in your business.
That is a massive question to try and answer, and something every tech leader needs to be thinking about right now. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Make sure you take a very close look at your own software stacks, audit those upcoming vendor renewals, and maybe go check if your delivery truck is leaving your fancy restaurant dining room completely empty. Catch you next time.